Okay, so we are going to get going here. Pearl just wanted to point out that I guess on the chat there's like a little Q&A icon somewhere, and she just went in there and said hi to everyone. So tell if you're online, say hi back to her. It looks like we have about 24 people who are online. All right, so we're gonna get going here. So I am Andy Lockwood. This is the emergency workshop for juniors. And I have a brief presentation that I wanted to do to share some of the things we've learned from last year's class, 2015. Things have changed a little bit in terms of admissions, in terms of statistics, in terms of tactics, and just the general landscape. If you are just joining us and you don't see the chat, Pearl, do you see anyone in the chat? Then I think what you should do is if you can't chat, shoot Pearl an email. Pearl's email address is pearl@andylockwood.com. I do have a stack of questions that were, asked of me ahead of time. Not all of them actually had to do with today's topic, today's subject matter, but I will try to get to some of them. I was actually thinking that just in case, the chat didn't work, which, of course seems to be the case, then I might do a separate follow-up, shorter presentation just to answer some of these questions. So I'm going to get going with the presentation right now, and remind you, if you have any questions, just shoot an email to Pearl. All right, so let me figure out how to share my screen one more time, and here we go. Okay, so we're talking about the new rules of college admissions. What we're going to cover today is, number one, lessons that we have learned from last year's seniors, or I guess this year's seniors who are getting out, 2015. Rarely disclosed statistics or other information about what it really takes to get into a top college. Information that I have not shared before, because this is sort of a work in progress. Things change. In terms of just things I won't be able to accomplish today, I think you all know this. I can't possibly expertise you. I can't make you, I can't dump out 15 or whatever years of doing this into the next 30 minutes or so, but I'm going to give you some tactics that you can actually use. I'm definitely not going to give you the same old advice that you've heard from guidance counselors or your accountants or your financial guys. This is different stuff, and I'll certainly be able to highlight those areas of differences, and you probably won't even need those pointed out to you. You'll probably figure that out yourself. I'm definitely not going to be giving you the same message or messages that you get from colleges. Okay, so this is not the place for those messages. If you're wondering, I recognize that not all of you have heard of us. You may be new to our community here, our list. I wrote a book which made it to #1 bestseller on Amazon about financial aid, called How to Pay Wholesale for College. Pearl and I host the podcast called the College Success for Less Show, which is on iTunes and a bunch of other places. And we have a decent amount of listeners. We have over 1,500 downloads last episode we just cranked out. So that may not seem like a lot to many podcasters, but it shows that people are listening. And, once in a while, quoted in the media. We have, I do presentations that are, in high schools, libraries, things like that. I just wrote a book called The Incomparable Applicant, which I'm going to be releasing next week, the end of January. We're going to be offering it for 99 cents and on Kindle, which is a format that you can read with any electronic device, even if you don't have a Kindle. And that book is on admissions. And a lot of the stuff that I researched to come up with for that book are what I'm trying to distill into this short presentation. So Pearl and I, my wife, are in the college finance and admissions businesses, and we just recently started offering a career counseling. I'll explain why that's important. We just partnered with a career counseling firm. The biggest reason that sometimes people are curious about about why I got into this business. I had a pretty rough time between college and law school with loans, and it's really our mission to make sure that none of your kids, our kids, and or your kids goes through anything remotely like what we went through, what I went through. So today's kids have a much harsher environment that they're facing, and that number it could be triple, depending on if they go to medical school or grad school or something like that. So let's move on here. Our approach is a little bit different. So first of all, I think a fundamental question you should be asking is why you're sending your kid to college, because I'm the first one to admit, ironically, college is not right for everyone. So why are you sending your kids to college? Is it because you don't know what else to do with them? Is it because you just think that's what they're supposed to do? But I could tell you flat out that it might be a really bad move, particularly if your kid's not the most academically motivated, and he might be in the bottom 30-40% of the class. I'm not sure that kid belongs in college. I have those conversations all the time with parents. I actually had one this morning when I was driving home from the gym. Well, some people are interested in showing off, with the sticker on the rear windows of their cars, or bragging at cocktail parties. Some people, very few people, realize that this is not just about going to school. It's really an investment for the next 40 years, not the next 4 years, and that implies that there should be a return on your investment. So for us, college is about the next 40 years. I'll make some more comments on that. So we think that the purpose of college should be to get your child or your children into a great college that optimizes their chances of success at a great price that maximizes your ROI, your return on investment, because college is an investment. So part of that is, what's the payoff? Are they going to be prepared in today's economy, or in an economy 5 years from now, or whenever your child is graduating? So that's part of the investment. The other part, of the return that ROI implies is getting the school for as low of a price as you possibly can get. So that is our approach, and that's usually not something that guidance counselors talk about. Along the way, there's a bunch of warnings and landmines and things like that you have to really look out for. One of those, and this really has to do with our move to get into career counseling, is changing majors 2 or 3 times. 80% of kids change their majors, but that's a big problem if you change more than once, because what could happen is you could tack on another couple years to graduate, which is adds on to the cost. You're spending the extra years of tuition, extra 2 years of tuition at $40,000 or $50,000 or whatever you end up paying. You've also got the opportunity cost, meaning that you're not working in those extra 2 years, and you could be earning, a starting salary of $40,000. So when you add it up, it's a $200,000 problem in the near term. And then there's, the bigger aspect, the bigger picture is, what about what happens after college? So I want to say a word about tactics versus strategy. And I don't mean to be esoteric about this, but what I find is that a lot of kids and parents are engaged in tactics, but they don't have a strategy. So what do I mean by that? Tactic would be, for example, taking the SAT 5 times and review classes and all that. A strategy would be taking a look at, okay, what schools am I applying to? Which test am I better at, the ACT or the SAT? Do I even need to take those tests? Do I need to take other tests such as subject tests? Which school should I apply to? Those are more strategic concerns, and I think that a lot of times people focus, they blow off the strategy, they lose the forest through the trees, or they wing it, and you really can't do that in today's tough times, because we're playing a high stakes game. Even though President Obama was bragging about all of the economic improvements, I personally, I don't know if it's just me, but I don't really feel like things have improved that much, at least when I talk to regular people. So today's kids are graduating in a very challenging environment that I would argue is maybe the most challenging environment that college grads have seen in the last century. This process is unduly complicated. It's overcomplicated, and it can take years off your life. You've got financial aid regulations that nobody understands. You've got all sorts of deceptive marketing from schools, and they are businesses. You have to understand that. You've got all kinds of peer pressure. Kids, particularly seniors, once they start getting into schools, they're bragging about it to their friends, and those kids who didn't get in are feeling a little psyched out. I was talking to a client yesterday who's in 10th grade, and she was telling me that she feels like half of her friends are already taking SAT prep, even though they won't actually take the SAT for about another 9 months. So it's depending on where you live in the country, you could be subject to some severe pressure, and there's pressure from parents. A lot of times, and I certainly think I'm guilty of this too with my kids. But a lot of times, kids want something different, or they want it more. Parents want it more than the kids do, and the parents put all sorts of pressure on the kids, and maybe they have to realize that. Sometimes that's not the right approach. Sometimes just yelling at your kid over and over again causes them to tune out. I don't know. I'm no Dr. Phil, but at the very least, you should understand that there could be some strain in the parent-child relationship. By the way, Pearl, are we able to get anyone in chat? You see a couple of people. Okay, so if you have any questions, Pearl is monitoring. She's womaning the chat, and Pearl, that's in the upper right corner, the chat box. Whatever, you found it somehow. I can't see it from this screen. So if you have any questions, I'm going to be pausing in a few minutes just to take any questions. Pearl's going to moderate for me and write down anything. I do have a whole stack here. In the meantime, we'll just go through this chart. No, I'm kidding. This is I use this a lot in my live workshops. This is the simplified view of the Department of Education's financial aid regulations. This is what I meant by Byzantine. I just like using that word, so I wanted to come up with something to let me use that word. Let's look at some of these facts. Only 43% of kids graduate in 4 years. Why? Two main reasons. One is because a lot of state schools just don't have the bandwidth. They don't have the seats to be able to give to kids in classes. So sometimes if you need a certain class to fulfill your major, you may not actually get that class for a couple of years. So you kind of have to sit around and wait. So that's one reason. And the other reason I mentioned before is kids, a lot of kids change majors. Here's something, notwithstanding President Obama's cheerleading about the economy, 46% of college graduates are not employed in jobs that require degrees 2 years after graduation. That may be the scariest statistic that I've seen, and if I had to guess, I think that is going to rise, that percentage. Something that a lot of people are surprised by, this is actually in the good news category for many, is that most need and merit-based money combined goes to families that make six figures, families in the top quartile of income. So the problem or the issue is they're not sure how to get it, but that's who's getting this, the funds for the most part. And that's really because colleges are fighting each other to put, butts in seats, and they're having a hard time enrolling kids. So what they do is they try to bribe them, especially kids that are going to raise their particular profiles. And they'll give money to otherwise, on paper at least, affluent families. And critics for low-income families have been pretty vocal, saying that this is a bad thing because, not enough money is going to the families that need it the most. But I'm just giving you the facts. I'm not trying to be political about it. The other thing that surprises a lot of people is that the average discount at a private school, this goes hand in hand with the previous stat, is 45%. So they're giving almost half off. And again, the issue is, well, where do you find your list of schools? Which schools are doing this, and are they good schools for you? And we'll talk a little bit about that. Some colleges are a lot more generous than others, and there's not necessarily any rhyme or reason to that. Back to a sort of a bad stat, the average debt load keeps increasing, $33,000 per student. So I'm giving you good news and bad news. More bad news, student loans defaults are on the rise, And I wouldn't really put this in the category of a little-known college fact, but just in case you need to hear this, colleges are in business for themselves. They are businesses. Even though they are nonprofit institutions of higher education, all that mail that you get once you sign up for the SAT, I think most of the people on this presentation are juniors. They've already, signed up for the PSAT, maybe even in sophomore year, and they're getting all sorts of random colleges reaching out to them by not just email. Sometimes they make phone calls, and certainly a lot of snail mail and brochures. Those brochures where every kid is shown outside frolicking on the quad, even if the school's in like northern Minnesota, where there's sub-zero temperatures. And of course, you see every ethnicity there, and nobody has a zit, which implies that if you go to those schools, it'll always be warm, and you won't have any acne. So those things cost money, and don't forget, you're the ones actually paying for that indirectly. So the whole point is that if you understand that they have their own agenda, and you can turn that against them, you can beat them at their own game by understanding that. So in our approach, and this is the approach that's embodied in the book that I'm releasing at the end of January, The Incomparable Applicant, we broke things down to a 5-step process. So the first and I'm going to speak some more about this after I just give this overview. So the first step is really your mindset. You have to have the right mindset to win at the college admissions game. You need to begin with the end in mind. Remember, it's about the next 40 years, not the next 4. Then you target what are best fit, quote unquote, best fit and reputable colleges in the areas that are going to be result in the most success for you. Step 4 is understanding the rules of the game of admissions and implementing strategies to maximize your chances of getting in. And the last step is you need to just manage all this. You've got to create and adhere to a timeline and strategy for the essays, the applications, the visits, the interviews, and all the other things that come up. And believe me, it's a lot of stuff that comes up. So let's talk about the mindset, which I refer to as beyond the rear window sticker colleges. And I think you know what I mean by that. The schools that are represented on the rear windows of cars in your neighborhood. So the first thing to understand is just because a school has a high rank doesn't mean that it's a great school. And I'm not poo-pooing the highly ranked schools. What I am saying is that there's a lot of BS in U.S. News and World Report and all the other rankings. Most of the rankings, but particularly U.S. News, I'm just picking on them because they're the biggest one. Most of the rankings are based on factors that have nothing to do with quality of education. That's sort of the strangest thing that people, don't realize. They just assume that that's somehow part of it. But in reality, the thing that correlates the most high with a school's rank happens to be endowment per student. It's money. So there's other things too, like reputation among peer colleges and things like that. But if you want some more background on how easy it is to game the rankings, I'll call your attention to a couple of things. There was an article about Northeastern University, which came out, I want to say, at the end of 2014. It was in Boston Magazine, and it described how Northeastern gamed the rankings. That might even be the title. If you Google Northeastern Game Rankings, Boston Magazine, you'll find out how this school, which was just a regular local school, I grew up right outside of Boston, Newton, Mass, right near Boston College, actually. And Northeastern was, not anything special. It was just a local school. Now it's number 48 in the country. Why is it? If you read this article, if you care to learn, you might come away a little depressed, like I was, and I'm pretty cynical about it. You'll see some of the tactics they employed. One of those is they sent out a ton of direct mail. They sent out, I remember reading a couple of years ago, 200,000 pieces of direct mail for. They got 43,000 applications, and I think that number has risen each year since I saw that stat. And that's, of course, that's very expensive to do. That cost them about $140,000, $150,000 between the data that they purchased from the College Board, who you probably think of as the SAT people, but they also, that doesn't factor in any of the printing or the postage or anything like that. So many schools are engaging in this type of activity because it works. I was talking, I think it was yesterday, it might have been the day before, about how dumb all these emails and direct marketing from colleges is. and this is what the mom was saying, and I said, well, yeah, but you have to understand that it works. So that's why they keep doing it, because she was saying they're wasting so much money, and they're not, because if they were wasting money, they would stop doing it. So that's the first thing to really understand about the mindset. Here's something that I think is important to do, and I don't ever cover this in my public workshops, but I think it's important. If you're thinking about going to grad school, you should look at the grad school's disclosures about where they are pulling kids from undergraduate colleges. So, for example, when I was writing The Incomparable Applicant, my new book, I looked up the undergraduate colleges that were represented at Harvard Law School, meaning where does Harvard pull its kids from? And I think there was something like 161 colleges last year. And what I found was that maybe about 30, 40 or whatever of them were name brand elite colleges, but the vast majority, the remainder of that 161, I guess that's about 75%, were either regular colleges that are, just nothing special, not particularly highly ranked, just good, solid schools, but also a whole bunch of schools that even I had never heard of, like these strange rabbinical schools and evangelical Christian type schools, and a whole variety of places. So what I'm getting at is that not just with grad school, but just to use grad school as an example, whether it's law school or medical school or whatever, it really matters not where you start. It really matters more where you finish. And there's a very strong argument, particularly if you're going on to a medical school where getting in is so heavily predicated on your GPA. There's a very strong argument that you are better off going to a slightly less competitive school where you can get a higher GPA and probably more money, as opposed to a school that you're lucky to get into that doesn't really want you as badly because they have many other people like you, and you're going to struggle to keep up. So I don't want to get too sidetracked here, but I feel that's an important point to make. A book I recommend a lot is a book called Colleges That Change Lives. I think that'll help you understand how the elite schools are not necessarily the best schools for every kid. And the gentleman who wrote that, I should have put that on this presentation. His name is Lauren Pope, P-O-P-E, passed away a few years ago, but that's a great book. Here's something that I find kind of interesting. If you're going into business, I have a lot of kids who want to major in business, and I don't want to get into whether that's a good idea or not, but I have my own misgivings about that. But a lot of times kids, want to go to a name brand school because they think it's going to make them, more easily hired out of school. And I'm not dismissing that entirely, but you can't. I don't want you to dismiss what I'm about to share with you. If you looked at the list of where the Fortune 500 CEOs went, you would find a smattering of the elite schools, but you'd also find that they all didn't go to elite schools, or if they, by the way, if they even went to college. So, for example, here's a little quiz. And if you, by the way, if you're chatting. If you're on the chat, Pearl, are people in the chat? You're not seeing a whole lot of activity, just a few people. If you have any questions, shoot them to Pearl on the chat. If you can't figure out how to do the chat, you can email her, pearl@andylockwood.com. Do you have your email window up, Pearl? She's nodding. And okay, good. Nodding is good. So, I think you guys will figure this out. But which colleges graduated more Fortune 500 CEOs? Boston College or Wayne State University? First of all, have you heard of Wayne State? Okay. Maybe not. And BC, I'm sure you've heard of. Well, Wayne State has produced more Fortune 500 CEOs. What about Duke or San Diego State? San Diego State has produced 500 more Fortune 500 CEOs. So again, it's not necessarily about going to the elite schools. Yes, it helps, but not as much as people think. Okay, focusing on the next 40, not the next 4 years. And I actually got a few questions that were sort of consistent with this slide, and so I want to explore this. So, common thing I hear is, okay, that makes sense to focus on majors and careers and all that, but my kid's only 16 years old and he's got no idea what to major in or to do with the rest of his life. What do I do? And I get that, but I feel that number one, that's normal. Okay, it's not something to be worried about. It's actually like a normal thing. But I feel that the reason that kids don't really know what they want to do. By the way, I should actually make an opposite comment. A lot of times kids no, they are very certain about what they want to do. And I'm not always sure how they, come up with those decisions. But even when a kid tells me that he always wanted to be a nano microbiologist since he was 4 years old and, of course, couldn't spell it, what I, in the back of my mind, what I think about is that, 80% of kids change their majors. So if you have a kid who has no idea what he wants to do, or you have a kid who's always known what he wants to do, chances are still pretty high that they're going to change their majors. And I feel that happens. And remember, we're talking about a near-term $200,000 problem between the 2 extra years of college and not working, let alone the 40-year, potentially the bigger problem about getting out, not having a job, or not being trained to do something productive. I think that's because kids don't know the right questions to ask. And I can say that about this whole process, but particularly when it comes to choosing a major, they don't understand things about themselves. They don't know how they're wired. They don't know necessarily what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are. They know what their aptitudes are, but they're not necessarily the same things as what they enjoy doing. And just because you're good at math or you like to argue doesn't mean you should go into a math field or be a lawyer. Okay. So the reason we brought in our career counseling firm is to address this issue, which is that, kids need to understand how they are wired, and then look at certain fields that are going to be not only good for them based on their wiring. So in other words, some people are very comfortable in, speaking in public and big crowds and all that. That person, if that person's a math guy or a math girl, being an actuary is probably not the best field for that person. I had a client from this year whose parents are in the medical field, and he wanted to be an emergency room doctor. So he went through our process, and it turned out that everything about the way he was wired and the type of student he was and his strengths and all this type of stuff correlated very highly with his being a doctor. And so that was great. But the one caveat, the one sort of red flag, was that he is not a fast decision maker. He likes to deliberate and look at things from different angles, which indicates that he's not necessarily right to be in the ER. So he might be better off as a different type of doctor. So that's what I mean by wiring. I hope that helps. So this focus on the next 40 really is an example of backward planning. I think it's a whole lot easier to plan for college once you focus on the what's next. And again, this is one source of huge difference between between us and your guidance counselors, because a lot of guidance counselors are sort of the opinion, hey, you know what, just get into the best school possible and it'll all work out. But I just think the stakes are too high today to really just wing it like that. You need to have a game plan instead of just defaulting into the 6-year plan. Let's look at some near-term landmines. I mentioned this before. If you switch majors a bunch of times, you stay in college longer. We talked about the extra costs, the opportunity costs. Okay, we got this. Now, here's another example of why I think career counseling is so important. It's very easy to get out of college and be prepared for a career that's non-existent. So how many marine biologists do you know? There's so many colleges that offer that as a major, but honest to God, the only marine biologist I think I've ever met was at SeaWorld, and he was feeding Shamu. All right, I see some of you guys are asking questions, so let me hold on. Let me come to a break, Pearl, and then I'm gonna start answering some of these questions. So if you have questions, put them in the chat or email Pearl. Her email address is pearl@andylockwood.com. Oh, chat's working? Got the thumbs up from Pearl. Pearl, I wish I could hear you. Not all the time. I mean, all the time. Okay. So, there's not a whole lot of jobs for marine biologists unless you're going to, if you're not at SeaWorld, maybe you're leading a whale watch or something. Another example, quick story. I had another client, very bright girl, who went through our career counseling process over the winter. And she is very interested in being an architect, and she's done internships and summer programs and all sorts of things like that to explore that. And when she went through this exercise, it it indicated that that all of this stuff correlated very highly with that field of architecture. So everything looked great. However, when you look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics and look at the growth prospects of architecture, you will find that it is literally the fourth worst career to get into right now. Fourth worst. So what my career counselor partner, what she was able to suggest to our client was that she not only explore architecture, but she also explore some other fields that correlate at least as well, if not better, with how she is wired. So one of those, I believe, was urban planning. Another one was, I want to say, civil engineering. My point is that this helps you go in with eyes wide open and avoid a deadly mistake. I want to make a quick comment about how college can actually really hurt your ability to acquire skills that potential employers want. So in order to talk about this, we have to spend a little bit of time talking about what are those skills that potential employers want. The first thing they want, and this is from polls that I read from that poll hiring managers and CEOs and all that, the number one skill they want is critical thinking skills. Meaning the ability to think on your feet, to deal with ambiguity. It's not filling in a bubble for a multiple choice test. It's writing, it's communicating, it's thinking, it's recognizing patterns. It is comparing, contrasting disparate things from different elements or different disciplines, and then coming up with new ways to combine those types of elements. So here's a more specific, less fuzzy example. College is supposed to prepare you for work in 5 years. Who on this call can predict what the world's going to look like in 5 years? Who knows? I mean, I read a lot of articles about the recent Consumer Electronics show where all these new technologies are being debuted, and I read a lot of crazy stuff by this guy Ray Kurzweil and other futurists who work. I think Kurzweil now works for Google and all that. And I'm looking at all these trends, like technology is going to be wearable as opposed to handheld, and you've got these driverless cars coming out, and all the environmental stuff that's happening, and soon you're going to be able to learn a language by taking a pill, which is going to just activate a particular part of your brain and just download like software into your brain and all this stuff. So I mean, it sounds kind of nutty to me, but I kind of believe this stuff is happening. My point is that who knows what the world's going to look like in 5 years? 5 years ago from today, who could say, who out of any of us could have said what today's environment was going to look like? So the point is that there's ambiguity, and there could be, unlike a multiple choice question, there could be and will be many situations where your child is going to be faced with not a right or wrong answer, but 5 potentially right answers. And that's what employers want. They want kids who are going to be able to learn on their own, learn on their feet, and deal with this uncertainty. There are certain majors in college that do a great job at fostering the development of critical thinking skills, and there are majors that do a lousy job at fostering the development of critical thinking skills. So my advice is to stay away from the majors that do a terrible job if you are concerned with being able to be employable once you graduate college. You may be wondering now, what are the good majors, what are the bad majors? So the good majors are, some of them you probably would be able to think about right away, such as the hard sciences like pre-med or biochem and those types of things. Engineering is great for critical thinking because there's a lot of testing and that type of stuff. But some of the other ones that are great for critical thinking are history, philosophy, English literature, and so on and so forth. The classic liberal arts. By the way, I'm not saying that that's all you should do in college. What I think you should, the best of both worlds is majoring in something that's going to help develop your critical thinking skills, but also along the way you intern, you get real life practical job skills along the way. That's the best of both worlds. But I'm getting a little sidetracked. What are the bad majors? Teaching. I know that's sad. I'm not trying to be offensive. I'm sure there are some teachers on this call, on this webinar. What else? Business, which is the most popular major in the country. It's also the worst major for critical thinking skills. How do I know this stuff? There's something called the Collegiate Learning Assessment Test, the CLAT, that about 500 or so colleges administer. I can almost guarantee that no one on this presentation has ever heard of that. And the reason for that is because the results are so abysmal. Colleges don't want that information to get out. So that's where I draw this from. All right, let's move along. You don't want a kid to end up in a job that they hate. That's another long-term landmine. And what we all want for our kids is the best for them. You don't want them to have this inability to achieve their desired income or lifestyle because of these series of choices made from high school or earlier. You want them to have the most options possible. Let's talk about how to target best fit colleges. So I mentioned this before. I'm just going to skim over it here. First step is understanding your wiring. The next thing is identifying careers that correlate with your wiring and your wants and your needs. I don't think I need much more discussion on that. Do some due diligence on whether these careers are in growth or decline mode. You can look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics. That's a great place to look. You should research whether these careers are suitable for you by looking at what people do all day. So interning is such an important thing to do. And there are all sorts of other resources. We have access to these videos. I can't remember the name of the site, otherwise I would give it to you. But there's a site that has all these videos of people who are just talking about their jobs. They don't have any agenda. They're not selling anything. They're just being candid. And then the next thing is, once you've done steps 1 through 4, is identify the colleges that are reputable in these areas that are attractive to you. All right, Pearl, I'm going to pause here and take some questions. Do you have anything for me? You texted me a question. Okay, you're sitting 3 feet away from me, but you texted me. So I'm going to take the time now to to go into my phone. All right. So let's see. Did I pick up Lizzie? I picked her up last night. Not that text? Okay. If you are not looking at a published top list, what criteria do you recommend when looking for a school? Okay, well, I actually covered a little bit of that. That is a good question, though. I think the criteria where I would start with is I would go to the Career Center, and I would ask them, hey, who is recruiting on campus? What companies, what entities are coming here to recruit kids? I have a son or a daughter who's thinking about majoring in such and such. I want to know what the chances are. What strategic relationships do you have with potential employers? I would also find out, so out of the people who graduated last year or in years past who majored in this particular major, what did the most successful ones do? Meaning the people with the most job offers, or however you define success. What do they do, and how do I model that? I think that is such an important, those two questions are so important. And let's face it, you'll never see a career center on a college tour. Very rarely. I mean, there are some schools now that are starting to show that are starting to take you by the career center. So I think that you'd be very well served to ask those questions. I think that's important. If you're planning on going to medical school or law school or something like that, then you find out, what the admit rate was, from your particular school. So I remember going back 3 or 4 years, we had a client who was interested in going to medical school, and she was a kind of a low Ivy type kid. She was class president of a big public high school, and really a fantastic girl, just a very high achiever, a very hard worker, really nice person. And she was going down to Tennessee to visit Vanderbilt. And her dad was telling me this, and he said, by the way, as long as we're down there, I'm going to drive over to Memphis, and I want to see Graceland, because he was a big Elvis fan. So I said, do me a favor, as long as you're there, why don't you go check out Rhodes College, Rhodes, which I think is in that Colleges That Changed Lives book by Lauren Pope that I mentioned before. And he's like, I never heard of it. What are you talking about? I said, just do me a favor, check it out. So he called me, he and his daughter called me from the tour, and he said something like, Andy, I can't believe it. They just said that 89% of their kids get into medical school, which is higher than most Ivies, I believe. So he was kind of blown away by that. And I said, well, yeah, that's why I recommend it to you, because just because you haven't necessarily heard of it doesn't mean that the stakeholders at the next level have not heard of it. All right, Pearl, you texted me another question here. Is that what that means? Is it easy to get past grad info from a college? Past, you mean graduation info? from previous graduates. You got to go to the Career Center, and they all keep data on this. I wouldn't say that it's public. I don't think there's a public database at least that I know of. I wish there were, but I actually think that might change. But in the meantime, I think that information is all at the career centers of each of these schools. All right, let me move along. I want to talk about college selection, guidance counselors, and a word about Naviance, because I keep telling you how we have a different approach. So for those of you who know what Naviance is, you probably are already using it, but there may be some people who don't. So Naviance, I'm not even sure I'm pronouncing it right, but I grew up in Boston, so that's how I would say it. Naviance, I think I've heard it pronounced, is a college selection software that is used by most high schools. Sadly, I think kids don't get access to it until kind of too late, but the earlier you get it, the better. So I would talk to your guidance counselor after you get off this webinar. And it's used to compare, well, it has other functions, but it's used to compare your grades and your scores versus other kids from your high school. So in other words, excuse me, if you were interested in applying to Villanova, and you go to North Hills High School, which I just made up, and you were curious about where you stacked up, you would go into Naviance, and you would have your grades, your GPA, and your SAT or your ACT scores, and you'd be able to see where you stacked up versus the 3 years worth of data of other kids from North Hills High School who had applied to that particular college. So that's a good starting point. The issue is that the admissions decision is based on so much more than just your grades and your scores. It's based on 20 or 25 factors, at least, depending on the kid. And you're not competing only with kids from your high school, you're competing with kids from all over the world. So those are the two big flaws with Naviance, and I'm not bashing Naviance at all. But I actually like it, but we actually use a different software that factors in all these types of things in our private practice. But if you don't have access to our software, then I would certainly start with Naviance. All right, let's talk about the game of admissions. As you wonder why I put this picture of a supermarket up on the screen, there's some stats you need to understand. So 2/3 to 80% of the class at any given private school is reserved for non-academic reasons, non-academic slots. There's a great book that came out, I want to say 10 years ago or so, from a former admissions officer at Duke, who made this gave this statistic and pointed out that schools will look for first. They will look for all these special categories. So what are the special categories? If you're an athlete or a musician or an underrepresented minority or an international student or diverse from some other part of the country, or a legacy, or you're extremely affluent and you are potentially not only going to pay full price, but you're also likely or hopefully going to develop into a donor. There's actually, the word for it is a development case. Those represent about 2/3, if not 80%, of these slots. So what I'm getting at here is that if you are not in that group, one of those groups, so in other words, if you're just a plain old bright, good student, white guy, not to be offensive, but this is a free workshop, so I'll refund anyone who's offended. But if you're not in one of those categories and you're applying to a school that admits 15%, the real rate for you is, I don't know, half that, whatever the math works out to be. It's not whatever the published rate is, because all those special categories tend to drag down the average SAT and ACT scores and the average GPA. So if you look at a school and you're like, oh, okay, well, I have a 1900 on my SAT, and it says that the average range is from 1800 to 2000. I'm right in the middle. I have a good shot. You really don't. You need to be at the upper end of the range if you are not in one of those special categories. So that's something everyone needs to really understand. The supermarket photo is there for a reason. It's not just because I couldn't find some clip art. What you want to avoid being when you apply to college is a commodity. It's just one of these products that, there's really no difference, and they're all about the same price. They all look the same. So I always talk about toothpaste. You could substitute a gallon of milk or something. What I'm getting at is if you apply to a competitive college and you're one of, 5,000 kids with substantially the same grades and scores, you are a commodity. And what you need to do is understand that in order to get out of that commodity pile, to be different, you need to understand that you have to engage in what is fundamentally a marketing exercise. You have to stand out so that you can explain, this is why you should take me compared to the other 5,000 kids with the same grades and scores. So Pearl is waving at me because I know there's some more questions coming in. So if you have any more questions, I'm going to try to get to them. Just enter them into the chat, and she's monitoring. Are you chatting back, or are you just kind of waving at me? Feel free to chat though, Pearl. I mean, don't be so shy. She's so shy. Let me put this another way. So the gentleman who made the software that we use, that I kind of think of as Naviance on steroids. His name is Don Betterton. I'm friendly with him. He was on the admissions committee at Princeton for 35 years and director of financial aid for, I think, most of that tenure. And he told me that in any given application, roughly 60% of it is academics, and the rest of it, the 40%, is non-academic stuff. That is why he created his software. He was actually one of the guys who was involved with developing Naviance, but he recognized the flaws, and about 5 years ago, he came up with this new software that I use. So 40%, that's a lot. So a lot of kids don't understand that. They need to start thinking about what they can do that's not academic that can affect their chances of admission really early on in school. So the little, is that an acronym? The little device, the mnemonic device that we use here is we want kids to think CASA. CASA stands for consistent, atypical, strategic activities. In other words, atypical stuff. And I'm going to explain that. Then the last component here for the game of admissions is you have to fish in the right pond. You have to make sure that you are applying strategically to colleges, not only to the rear window sticker colleges. So there's something like 4,000 colleges in the whole country. There are about 90 that admit 50% or less out of that 4,000. Only 90. That means the vast majority of schools are really not ultra competitive to get into. It does not mean that they are worse schools. Again, rank is kind of BS in many cases. So fishing the right pond is another component of not only the game of admissions, but also getting scholarships. Not sure why this slide is doing that. Okay. So let's talk about activities, extracurricular type stuff. There is joining a club versus founding a club. One is typical, one is atypical. Volunteering versus starting your own charity or doing your own event. Being on a team versus being all league or captain or something. Being a scout, a Girl Scout or a Boy Scout versus getting your gold award. Remember, do the atypical things and you'll stand out. Do you have to do all these? No. Working is actually a good thing. Working is borderline typical, but what's atypical would be starting your own business. These are just some examples. Some kids just like to write. Okay, that's kind of typical. But if they published a book, it's very easy to self-publish. I can tell you that firsthand. So likes to write versus publishing a book, that's a difference between typical versus atypical. All right, let's talk about game plan for essays and applications. Actually, wait, Pearl, do I have any unanswered questions? Like 2? Let me just pause. Okay. Did you pick up Lizzie? I told you I picked her up. Oh, that's earlier. Okay. I think that's funny. Pearl's rolling her eyes and just kind of, okay. What makes a kid interesting to colleges if all kids have the AP classes, honor societies, high GPA? What should a sophomore be doing now to become more interesting? Yeah, that's the way I just covered. So good question. I think I just answered that. Hopefully I did. And I like how these are all anonymous questions, Pearl, but you know, that's fine. They're not just your questions, Pearl. They're actual questions. Okay. For a sophomore level kid, where should an investment be going now? Any to 529s? Okay, look, this is an admissions webinar. I'm going to just send Pearl your email address, and I'll either email you directly after this webinar, or when I think, like I said before, I was thinking about maybe doing a follow-up webinar just to answer all the questions I couldn't get to, because I have a whole stack here. All right, game plan for essays and applications. First of all, you have to understand the purpose of the common application essay. What is the purpose? The purpose is to answer the question, why should we take you? That's what's being asked. Why should we take you? Period. It's marketing. The supplemental essays are a little bit different. So let me just back up. The common application essay is, you know, at its core really about why should we take you, but put another way, it's why are you interesting? Why are you interesting to us? And granted, it's kind of hard sometimes when you look at the questions. If you look at last year's essay prompts, which I believe are going to be the same this year, some of these questions, like describe an obstacle that you overcame. I mean, for 98% of kids, I don't think they've really had any obstacles, so it's not that interesting. but that means you just don't choose that one. You know, there's 5 choices. So the purpose of the essay is to answer, of the common application essay is, you know, A, answering why you want to come here, and B, showing why you're interesting. And they're very closely related, but I guess they're not exactly the same thing. The supplemental essays. Now, not every college has supplemental essays, but some schools, particularly private colleges, the more competitive ones, have supplemental essays, maybe 1, maybe 5. And sometimes they're really goofy. Some, you know, or sometimes they're pretty provocative. What course would you teach here at this school? What community do you come from? Those are examples of some of the better supplemental essay questions that I've seen. I think that the purpose of the supplemental essay question, particularly a question that asks, why do you want to come here to our college, is designed to demonstrate that you are interested in that school, that you are really not just superficially interested in coming to the school, that you have a genuine interest. Now, the reason that I believe that is because college admissions officers are very, very hyper aware of something called the yield. The yield is the ratio of kids that they admit versus who matriculate. So the lower the yield, the less desirable the school actually looks. And that's bad for rankings. It's actually bad financially for them, because when they go and build the next $18 million workout facility, complete with all sorts of pools, even a lazy river, the latest in rock climbing, which is really important for kids in case we go to war in Switzerland. That's the best line I ever heard from a friend of mine. Thanks, Paul. They have to borrow that money, and they don't have, you know, they don't have a credit rating like an individual does when he gets a mortgage, but they have a yield. So schools are very, you know, sometimes schools won't let a kid in if they feel like he has only a superficial interest in attending that school. So making them go through 5 essays like Wake Forest did last year, I think helps them separate the wheat from the chaff, the casual interested applicants versus the committed ones. So the purpose of the supplemental essays is to show off that you've done your homework and that you are interested. So I mentioned the question, why do you want to come to our school? You can't say something like, well, because you offer a great liberal arts education and you're located in Boston, which is such a great city. Because that answer could be used for 50 other colleges in a 25-minute radius drive. So you can't do that. What I suggest that kids do is they dig into the school's websites, the course catalog, the bios of the professors, and there's a lot of raw material there to demonstrate that they are, in fact, not just casually, superficially interested. Deadlines, big problem. Everyone should, first thing, once they decide what college they're interested in, they should look at the deadlines. They should come up with a chart. They should put it on their calendar. There's so many kids each year who blow deadlines, and there's really no reason whatsoever to do that. So don't, get a handle on deadlines. By the way, that also goes for financial aid, which is outside the scope of this workshop. But every college has deadlines both for admissions and for financial aid forms. Get your essays done before you go back to college, before you go back to high school, when you are a senior. All the kids that I work with, and I'm pretty seriously considering doing at least one essay workshop this summer. I want them to get as much as they can possibly do before they get busy with school, because a lot of kids that are taking all these APs and all these other challenging classes, once they get back to school, they realize, it's a kind of a cold, harsh reality slap in the face, that their teachers don't care that they have college essays to write. A lot of times kids say that the first half of senior year is the hardest period in their academic career, just because of the workload, not because of the college process. So you'd better do whatever you can. I don't care if you're going to camp, whatever. You don't have to spend 9 to 5 working on your essays, but if you put in, 5 hours a month, 10 hours a month, you can get them done. Okay. Pearl, do I need to look at my questions? One more question. What does CASA stand for again? Pearl, why don't you answer that one? Do you not know what CASA stands for, Pearl? Okay, she just did something that was not family oriented to me with a hand gesture. CASA stands for, and this is in my book, consistent, atypical teen strategic activities. Consistent, atypical strategic activities. And so I guess I could have done a slide breaking that down. But consistent means you don't, in your junior year, you just join to 15 clubs. Consistent means that you show, an interest, and you develop an interest, over time. Atypical, of course, means what? Not typical. It means, if you're doing the same stuff that everyone else does, you're going to get average results. And that's sort of a deep life question. Pearl, if I could get you to come over here on the mic and do your Yoda impression, then maybe she has a really good Yoda. It'd be great if we could come up with a way for you to do that. But okay. That's not going to happen today. But atypical means do what kids are not doing. Strategic, some schools are looking for certain things. Some schools love a lot of community service, by the way. Some schools love entrepreneurial kids. So that's what strategic means. And activity means not sitting and playing Xbox. Okay. In terms of how we fit into this picture, if you guys are interested in our services, our approach is that we recognize that colleges are businesses and they stack the deck against you. So we help level the playing field, and we help position children not only to get into school at a great price for the parents, but also for success after college. That's the best thing that we can do. We feel like it's one of these things that, there's a cliche, I think, in business, that you sell what people want and give them what they need. So I think a lot of people on this call really want to learn how to get into a top school, how to avoid overpaying for school, how to clear away all the noise and confusion and get some clarity and all that, which, of course, I think we're very good at. But we also think that kids need to be thinking about what happens after college. So it's rarely something that people come to us for, but it's always something that we deliver. And the last bullet point here is, we do this so that you can get the best return on your investment by getting the lowest price possible. This is just off the top of my head. People that we are good at helping with all this process, business owners, because they have more advantages than non-business owner people do, meaning they have more loopholes. But they also understand that that this whole process is a business. College is a business. They understand that business owners tend to look for value. So whether you're a business owner or you think like a business owner, it's more about the mindset, I think, that, just to be clear on that. We have a lot of families who think that their income is too high to qualify for any discounts, but they end up, getting 10,000 off, 15,000 off, 20,000 off, and their kids are not necessarily, they necessarily posted 2,400 on the SAT or cure cancer or Ebola or any communicable disease last summer. So a lot of those families, we help student athletes. We have a lot of divorced or separating families who just don't know where to turn because they have that extra layer of complexity. And then people from all walks of life: doctors, lawyers, plumbers, electricians, auto body guys. You name it, we see it all. In terms of who we can't help, actually whom, I'm just showing off my grammatical skills there. I can give great advice. Pearl and I can give great advice, but if the kid doesn't take it, it's a waste of the parents' money, and it's a waste of our time. Nobody's happy. So I don't care so much about a kid's academic achievements. In fact, I kind of like the kids who look a little bit different. I don't know if that's just because of me. We do have plenty of kids who get into Harvard and Cornell and all these types of places, but I'm not really looking for that. I'm looking for kids with the right attitude, kids who are not slackers. We're awful with helicopter parents. So parents can be involved, but they can't do the work for the kids. I had a little bit of an argument with a client recently who was unhappy with us, and I pointed out that he has to let his daughter do the work, and she just wasn't doing it. And I reminded him that one time we met at a library over the weekend, and we were doing applications for her, and he actually literally grabbed the application out of her hand and started filling it out for her to get into the school that she was interested in going to. That's that I understand the impulse. You want to do the best for your kids, but helicoptering is a disservice to your child because you're not always going to be there, mom or dad. And if you think I'm being harsh, just wait till your kid gets to college and talks to a professor. Professors care less than me. I care a lot about our kids. I think actually that Pearl and I are the only 100% advocate in the corner of our families that we work for, because guidance counselors have their own agendas, teachers have their own agendas, principals sometimes do, college advisors at private schools have their own agendas. They all have different relationships with the administration and with the colleges that come recruit and all that type of stuff. We don't. We're 100% in your corner. Do-it-yourselfers should not call us because or reach out to us, just because they're going to do it themselves. They're going to second guess us, and I don't mind a discussion, but if you're going to end up, we had a family recently who, after we'd worked for them for about a year and a half and sent them over drafts of their financial aid forms, and then Pearl followed up with them like two or three times over a 30-day period because we never heard back. We found out that they had filed the forms themselves, and they made a couple mistakes on them that we never would have done. So that's that's not that's not who we're looking for. Done for you-ers. We don't do stuff for people. We do things with you. It's a partnership. So again, we give advice, the kids take it, we work together. It's not a one-way street either way, it's a two-way street. So I think you get that point. I'm not good with helping people who don't want to hear the truth. Sometimes that hurts. If you think that your kid's going to Duke but has a 25 on the ACT and a solid A- average, and it doesn't fit one of the special categories, we're not going to be that helpful to you if you don't want to hear that. And I guess the last one here is we just don't want any unpleasant, humorless blamers, whiners, complainers. You know who you are, right, Pearl? Yes. So at this point in our practice, there is thankfully for us, there's a lot more demand for us than we can actually typically provide. So we don't have to take people that we know are not going to be a good fit for us. And by the way, even if that weren't the case, I still wouldn't take them because life's too short. So I don't mean to be too, aggressive or obnoxious about this, but I thought that was important to say. And families, I guess this is the last point I wanted to make. We're not good with families who don't understand the return on investment, because we talked about the college return on investment. We are an investment to work with. We are not cheap. We are not the most expensive. We are not the cheapest. We are an investment that, if we are a good fit for each other, will pay off many times the amount that is required to work with us. No, I'm not going to talk about our services here. This is more of a class. But if you do want some more information about us, this is how you do it. Your next steps, and this is where this is available now. If you're watching this on replay, I can't promise you that it's going to be as available, but if you are interested in learning about our services and figuring out whether we are a good fit for you while we try to figure out the same thing, the best bet is to start with a free consultation where we can talk about everything, your needs, your kid, your finances, you name it. You fire away any question at all about your college plan, even if you don't think you have a college plan, and we will talk and decide what next steps are, if any, if we can help you or not. There's plenty of people I can't help. I think about a third of the people that I speak to on these conference calls are people that, for one reason or another, I decide we cannot help them. So the best thing I can do is be honest, even when I'm breaking bad news. So that's just a little bit more about our approach. So that's it. Thank you very much for participating in this webinar. And sorry about the little glitches with chat and all that, but I think we resolved those. I'm happy to talk to you, and you have the information here. And thanks a lot. Good luck with the entire college process. Bye-bye.